So, welcome everybody to our Solving Scope 3 chat. So let's make this informal. You know, we're here to hopefully help guide you through what is becoming quite a tricky subject for supply chains. So, does anybody know what Scope 3 emissions are, to start with?
Please tell us.
Yeah, so thank you. So Scope 3 emissions are basically emissions that are outside of your control within your supply chain. So from a supermarket's perspective, a loaf of bread on the shelf or a pint of beer or whatever, often the Scope 3 emissions are about 70%, and those emissions are all farm-based. So that's in the production for the loaf of bread. 70% of those emissions are in the wheat production on farm. So it's really critical if supermarkets, retailers, supply chains are going to get to net zero, that farms do what they can to reduce their emissions. And really the simple solution is, if you are a farm that gets to net zero, then your Scope 3 emissions as far as the retailer is concerned, or the supplier or the producer or the processor, sorry, they are zero. So if my emissions are zero on my farm, then anything I produce on that farm, whether you are the people who buy my wheat, or you're my insurer, or my bank manager, all of those emissions can be reported as zero. So it goes from a 70% of the loaf of bread to 0%. So that means there's only 30% of the emission to get rid of. So how do we solve it? So we start by effectively gathering baselines on our farms. So each of our farms, we start with a full natural capital audit. The smiley man in the front is really putting me off. I feel it's brilliant. We start by a full natural capital audit. So we do an audit across an entire farm to a 1 metre resolution to UK HAB level 3. So this basically tells us how many hedgerows we have, how many trees we have, how many different habitats we have, wetland, scrubland, woodland, all of those different things. And what that does, that helps to tell us what our baseline natural capital is. But that also tells us how much of each of those habitats we have that are removing carbon. We then do a full carbon audit, so measured carbon audit, where we're taking soil cores and creating a baseline soil carbon stock. So typically farms in the UK are anywhere between, you know, if you're on really light sandy soil, you're about 1% soil organic matter. With some really peaty soils, you might be up to sort of 25%. And there's everything in between. What we're interested in is the starting point. And then what we do is we do a full emissions audit. So we'll take all of the activities that are happening within the farm boundary, and we will measure all of the emissions from all of those activities. And so we then have a balance between our total emissions and our total carbon removals. And if we get to exactly the same number of emissions as removals, we're at net zero. And if we've got more removals, then we're beyond net zero. And that's a really cool position to be in. And actually what we find is quite often farms are a lot closer to zero than they think they are, especially if they've got a reasonable amount of natural capital, especially if they've got, you know, lots of hedgerows and trees, and they've started a regen journey. So the secret really is to get farms as quickly as possible to that net zero position. And what we want from supply chains is for them to help finance that. So we call those insets. So the journey to net zero, so I've got a graph here. So this is a farm, it's only a small farm, it's only 35 hectares roughly, but it's an intensive fruit production business. We've got a few lines here, but this is the one we're interested in. This blue line, it's their carbon balance, and it's going down over time. But what we're also measuring is how the removals are going up. So how we're predicting the removals to go up over time, and how we're predicting the emissions to go down over time. And what we do at Beyond Zero is work with farmers to help them continually make that balance between emissions and removals as wide as possible. But in effect, once you've gone past that net zero position, then those Scope 3 emissions become zero. And that's the key for supply chains. Any questions? Very good. So This is a particularly good example because they actually started literally just above zero, so effectively emitting 9 tonnes more than they were removing. But actually, through some quite simple interventions, we've got them to a beyond zero status within the first year. But we get some farms. We've got one farm in particular whose operational emissions are 13,000 tonnes a year, and that's going to be a much trickier job. So what we're looking at with those guys is to continually change their soil management. So we're looking to help get the soil to do a lot of the heavy lifting, because what we do know is that when we change practices, from heavy tilling, no cover cropping, no sort of compost or anything like that, go from that situation to introducing low till and cover crops, you can very quickly demonstrate that you are removing more carbon into soils than you are emitting. And these guys at Downforce, actually, the smiley man in the front, what we now know is that what these guys can do is to demonstrate that carbon flux between the measurement points. So the baseline year to when we then remeasure in 5 years' time, these guys are really, really accurately or able to accurately measure the change, which is really important for us. So we can see the result of our change in practices. So, and it's really apparent. We've done this on our own farm now for a few years, and it's really obvious to see, where we've started to put longer term cover crops in, where we've stopped ploughing, where we've changed our practices, just how quickly you can reverse that balance. And so, it's really important to get that baseline as early as possible, so that we can start from a measured position, and then we can measure our outcomes going forward. Any questions? Yes.
How is that transition? How are you finding the profitability over that transition kind of period?
Yeah, great question. So, the whole issue with a transition to regenerative agriculture is that everybody tries to do it too quickly. So what we talk about is a much more measured. So this is the exciting bit from my perspective. So we work with farmers, dairy, beef, sheep, all the big emitters. Whenever we go to a dairy or beef farm, it's always burping cows that are the biggest emission. If we go to an arable farm, it's always nitrogen. Go to an intensive dairy, it's nitrogen and belching cows. But if you take a very slow and steady approach to a regenerative transition, you will not see a reduction in income, net income. Yeah, and we're very clear on that. It's always what happens too often is people try and move too quickly, and if you try and move too quickly, you generally mess up something in the system. And so the whole idea is to gradually reduce tillage, gradually increase complexity in herbal lays, gradually reduce nitrogen usage, and not suddenly flick a switch and say, hey, I'm low tilling, I'm and using less nitrogen, and therefore I'm a regenerative farmer. It's no good if your income starts to drop. So we've got case after case after case now where we've managed to maintain income, maintain output, but gradually reduce emissions.
So is that 5-year period, 10-year period?
Every farm's different. So we've seen some really quite quick transitions where we've got a good example of a dairy farm in West Wales where they were using quite intensive ryegrass lays, pushing for output, going for the 12,000 litres, high input. We managed to get them from positive 1,200 tonnes to negative 300 tonnes in about 4 years. Yeah. They did, I will caveat that by saying they did choose to go to lower output. So they were keen to go to sort of 9,000 litres rather than 12,000 litres. Yeah. Cool.
So that carbon per litre of milk, what does that look like after that transition?
Reduced, yeah. So carbon intensity on the litre of milk reduced. Yeah. So we did that, and that was really, some quite simple interventions. So that was by moving towards really complex mob grazing, in effect. And the next phase for him was to introduce agroforestry. So that was going to move the dial even further. So he was going to use agroforestry rows to manage the mob grazing with the highly diverse herbal lays. Yeah, yeah. And we've got another example in Devon, where we're just about to plant, or this winter start planting 90 hectares of agroforestry on another livestock farm, which is going to take them from plus about 300 to about negative 600. It can be done. Sometimes we just need to be imaginative, and and actually there are some really simple things we can do, but sometimes you've got to be really really entrepreneurial and really think about what you're going to do. But yeah, I would love to talk to you guys about how we can measure, monitor, get people on this path to reducing emissions and getting them beyond that net zero position, because we've proven we can do it so many times. Yeah.
I'll stop destroying your video.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Any other questions? Very good. Thank you. The enthusiasm is, yeah, it's brilliant. Right.